right, hello everybody. Welcome to our today's panel. So the team we're going to approach, and well, rather the question we're trying to answer to is AML and KYC, the new king. So first, thanks a lot, all of you, for making. We have a very diverse panel, geographically speaking. Today we have with us Federica Taconia, Senior Managing Director at FTI Consulting, Stephen Koch, Director and co-founder of AML, and Joseph Weinberg, co-founder of Shift Network and also advisor to UOCD and FATF. But I guess, guys, it will be much better if you introduce yourself. So I guess we can take a minute to do that. Federica, would you like to start with that?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. I'm a partner at a consulting firm, FTI Consulting. In particular, I run a practice called Financial Services, and we do two things. We work a lot with regulators, essentially investigating and creating a safe regulatory environment for to fight financial crime. And we also work with organizations at different size and different types of organizations, from very large banks to small fintechs, enhancing financial crime controls. And by financial crime, I mean money laundering, terrorist financing, KYC, anti-bribery and corruption, and various other types of crimes. And in particular, we've been involved in the recent Swedbank case investigation. It's in the public domain, but also in working with the Maltese regulator, for example, creating a stronger financial services industry from a financial crime point of view. That's me.
Thanks a lot. Maybe you could go on with you, Steve?
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm Steve Hancock. I'm director and co-founder of AML Analytics in the UK. I've worked in financial crime compliance for more than 25 years as a global head of money laundering prevention. When we set up AML Analytics back in 2010, it was done so that we can stress test the PEP and sanction screening systems that financial institutions have in place, because lots of institutions buy the screening systems and use them without knowing how effective they are and also how accurate they are. In addition to looking at those, we also validate transaction screening systems as well around the globe, and we have a global presence. We work with sort of all sectors who have to screen their client databases. That's me.
Thanks a lot, Steve. And last but not least, we can go on with you, Joseph. Special thanks, by the way, for connecting from Canada, where it's especially early for you. So thanks again for that.
No worries. Thank you for having me. Yeah, so I'm Joseph Weinberg. I'm the co-founder of Shift Network. I've actually taken a bit of a differentiated turn into the kind of KYC and AML space. I was an early pioneer in the Bitcoin ecosystem, so started in Bitcoin in 2010. I started working on regulations in about 3 years ago, as we started to realize that digital assets and cryptocurrencies had a greater requirement for clarity on the regulatory side. At Shift, we've been working on identity infrastructure for governments around the world, and most recently been working on solutions to the Financial Action Task Force travel rule requirement for the digital asset space. So we've been working on infrastructure kind of across a variety of spans of different areas, and have been kind of advising the OECD and the Secretary of the FATF for kind of the last 2 to 2.5 years as well.
Great, thanks. So that's really good, and I guess valuable for our audience to have all of you guys with kind of cross experience between the private and public sector within the MLCFT area. As to me, very quickly, I'm Alexandre Pinault. I'm acting money laundering reporting officer for Sonect, which is an EMI license in Lithuania. I'm also a board member at the FinTech Hub, which is the largest association of licensed fintech here in Lithuania, which is gaining weight on the Lithuanian ecosystem, and I'm the co-chair and founding member of the ACAMS Baltic chapters, which is getting increasingly involved as well with the fintech ecosystem here in Lithuania and in the Baltics. All right, so now that we know a little bit more about each other, we can set the scene quickly. We're talking fintech, we're talking AML. Obviously, avoid talking at least quickly about the fintech boom in Lithuania. It's been a few years now that the policy of attracting foreign companies and attracting fintech companies in Lithuania is extremely successful. Lithuania is now the first jurisdiction in terms of number of licensed fintech in continental Europe. I'm saying continental Europe, but what is happening with the Brexit at the moment might make us, Lithuania, the leader in Europe in general. All these new entities, obviously, which for a lot of them are young startups, need to get acquainted with often heavy and also numerous regulatory requirements, ever-evolving regulatory requirements as well, which are tied to these licenses that they acquired, among which, obviously, AML, CFT requirement. And in parallel to that, we have obviously all the AML scandals in the region, in the Baltic, generally speaking. So just to name a few, we've had Danske Bank, we've had Swedbank, as Federica was approaching. We've got Heavy a bit earlier on, and many of these were linked to different type of deficiency in due diligence process, in monitoring process, and we will be approaching that. But the consequence, in short of that, is that a lot of these fintech companies which were arriving on the market have been facing and are still facing a lot of challenges when it comes to opening bank account and basically get an access to the traditional financial system, which is very paradoxical at a moment where this fintech ecosystem is flourishing. So the first topic I wanted to approach with you guys and have your inputs on is basically these challenges that the fintech company are facing in working, in partnering with traditional banks, with the traditional financial services industry, and notably the recent position of the Bank of Lithuania that basically stress how important it is for traditional financial institutions to accept more fintech companies. So I guess the first question on the top of that and on this note is how do you think regulator, supervisor around the world, but especially in Europe, can facilitate the development of this partnership and the increase of the trust between the traditional financial sector and the fintech? Maybe we can start with you, Federica.
Sure. So I think, first of all, the problem of when a new innovative industry appears into an ecosystem, it always creates a challenge, and in particular a financial crime challenge, for the existing financial services industry. That is because new and innovation can more easily be exploited from a criminal point of view, and also because there is a sort of bias, almost a subconscious bias on the part of those who've been working with certain types of features. All of a sudden there is something new that we don't necessarily understand perfectly, and it also creates an element of fear. So there is an element of it, of the novelty, which represents a greater risk, but there is also an element of lack of understanding. Lithuania is in no way alone in this. I spend a lot of time in Malta, where I am helping the regulators and the industry fix this type of problem. In Malta, it's been the gambling industry. It's called the gaming industry in Malta, but it's online gaming, online betting. And the jurisdiction has done a lot to attract it. But now the big banks are refusing to give bank accounts to the very institutions that they have sought to attract. And that recalls very, very closely, it reminds me very closely of the Lithuania problem. There is one single solution to that. It's knowledge and understanding of two things. For the industry, there is knowledge and understanding of the true risks that this new fintechs, these new EMIs and FI represent. if we look, for example, at the cases of Swedbank, Danske, and others, if I look at the mafia money that I follow every single day, they exploit a lot the EMIs and the FIs. But I am pretty sure that if I ask a random person in an EMI, or if I ask a random person at the regulator, they will not be able to articulate to me how that is being abused. So the first element is to really understand how the financial crime is operating through those networks. The second thing is for regulators to educate themselves as to the industry, and for the big banks to educate themselves as to the industry. We really need to understand what this industry does, how it operates, and therefore where the vulnerabilities can be. I feel that we collectively as a world have wanted to go into this, but not many people have spent a lot of time really understanding what is needed. And also regulators need to, and banks need to remember the principle of proportionality. A smaller EMI, a smaller FI has a need for a financial crime compliance framework that it's leaner and more agile and smaller than one of a bigger bank. But that does not mean that it needs to be less effective or that it needs to be just of a lower standard. And it should not be assessed in that way. But it's only understanding that there is a difference between the various players, and that various players create different risks, that we can involve these new players into the industry. So that's my view.
Okay, thanks a lot for that. So basically, I am a fintech, I'm a traditional bank, I'm aware of the regulatory requirements, the obligation I'm subject to, but it's not enough. I need to know what risk specifically I'm exposed to, so that when I am to show my control for a fintech, or when I am to assess the risk for a bank, I know what I am dealing with. Very interesting indeed. Maybe Steve, you have any more input on that?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it just really goes back to the fact that risk assessment is an ongoing process. And regardless of whether you're a bank, an insurer, or whatever sector you're in, risks always change. And so, as Fed quite rightly said, it's down to educating yourself as to where the risks are with this particular new sector and where the threats actually are. So it's a matter of having a continuous process in place to understand the risks. And it's no different to introducing new products and services, that you have to understand the risks of those products and services anyway. So taking on clients that come from somewhere that's a bit different from your traditional customer base is really no different whatsoever. It's just a matter of assessing the risk.
Right. Thanks a lot for that. So really going into it rather than saying, "Oh, it looks risky, it must be risky, I'm not going for it." Joseph, to add on this topic?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very timely topic. The digital asset space in particular has been going through this in many different facets, and I think that the hardest thing is a few different things. One is, how do you even figure out what the risks are? Because it's just such a different paradigm change in terms of, how money is transferred, who your counterparties are. And so I think that that's coming with its own challenges. I largely think that that's what the Financial Action Task Force is trying to do right now, is give us some guidance and some initial kind of, understanding of saying, hey, startups, it's no longer the wild, wild west. You need to start, thinking about, risk and compliance in these different ways. And I think on the flip side of that is what we're seeing around the world today is a lot of kind of back and forth and kind of this tug of war between, banking and just simplified account creation and the ability to actually have financial services in a variety of jurisdictions around the world. You just saw India go through a very large Supreme Court hearing with the central bank mandating that companies in India, for example, must be given the right to banking. This is doing reviews across the OCC in the United States, and so I think this is all around the world. Everyone's kind of feeling this growing pain of figuring out, how do you work with digital assets? How do you work with a new space? How do you mitigate the risks? What are they? And I think it's still will take some time to be seen, but we're definitely seeing that across the board today. So.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, it's a learning process, ongoing learning process from both sides, indeed. Yeah, but yeah, I feel like it's getting better little by little. Thanks a lot for that. We've talked about the Swedbank case also before. We're not going to spend too much time on that. A lot has been written in the press. This has been doing a lot of noise. This is still making a lot of noise, but I think it's quite reflecting a lot of these different examples we've seen with more traditional financial institutions, more traditional banks, and the whole mood in the region in regards to what has been happening in the past and what is resurging at the moment. So I wanted to start with you, Federica, since you've been working on this case, and ask you if very quickly you could tell us what went wrong, if this could have been avoided, and how is this being corrected at the moment. And after that, maybe we can bridge it with the fintech ecosystem.
Yes. So the question, could it have been avoided? Yes, absolutely. It was easy to avoid. There were so many red flags, and not just a Swedbank. I want to make sure that here I'm not talking about a specific case. I'm using that as the example. Everything relating to financial crime that we've seen recently has very common features. The second thing that strikes me is that there were very simple things that failed, very small things that were extremely important, and the size of the catastrophe that's happened is so disproportionate compared to the little things. You know, the type of things that failed is people asking, for example, who really owns this company? And if you think of how many firms and institutions today are still struggling to answer that very simple question, hand on heart, can you say that you really know who owns every single company that is your client? Many firms cannot. And therefore we understand quite how risky the current environment in which we live is. There were these very simple things, and they have caused billions of financial crime. Imagine how much there is still going on and how much we are letting happen these days because of very simple questions that we forget to ask, or because, for example, we have a transaction monitoring system in place that ticks the box of having transaction monitoring, but actually does not do anything meaningful. It generates perhaps too many alerts, and we have to shut them down, or our people have to work through them extremely quickly, and they don't get any value out of them. These very simple failures are the failures that were behind Swedbank and Danske and so many other cases. So it's important to think that each of us playing in the financial services industry is not immune. It's these little things that are letting big mafia, organized crime, drug, human trafficking happen. And I see that every single day. I can tell you how much you can pay to buy a child on the dark web. And that is what Danske and Swedbank and all these other banks have facilitated, amongst other things. The other problem is that it's an international problem. You know, we think of Swedbank as the Swedish bank that has caused the problem. But in reality, the point of failure was primarily in Estonia and to an extent Lithuania and Latvia. However, the companies that enabled, the shell companies that enabled the process were mostly UK-based and Panama-based. And the money that went through it was mostly Russian and Azerbaijani. So all of a sudden we realized that it's a global problem and that it's not going to be fixed by kind of pointing the fingers at a jurisdiction, but rather questioning the system as a whole. When it comes to the fintechs and the smaller, the EMIs, the smaller financial institutions, they are abused every single day. And one particular way in which they are abused is by organized crime. I spend a lot of time investigating Italian mafia-related cases, and the financial institutions in particular create a very convenient chain of opacity between the mafia, the bad person, and the way in which the money needs to come out. They created that chain of opacity, and they are exploited every single day for this reason. And unless they ask the right questions, they will continue to be exploited.
Thanks a lot for that. So it's really interesting. Once again, it brings us to the requirement, the control, the processes, the mitigation measure within an organization, but also the fact of not closing your eyes when you know something is wrong, which has probably been the case in a lot of these situations. Steve, is there anything you would like to add on that?
Indeed, yeah, I certainly endorse what Fed said. The common thread here is either lack of or poor systems and controls. She also alluded to firms sort of ticking the box to say they have a transaction monitoring system or they have a PEP and sanction screening system in place. Certainly in my experience, we see situations where firms have these systems. They've been in place for some time. They were never configured correctly to begin with. Then we find the situation where the staff who were involved in the original setup have moved on, and nobody actually knows the rationale as to why particular rules were put in place, what parameters were set, etc., etc. So as a result, we find that these systems are certainly inefficient, and in many cases they're inaccurate. And it's really just ongoing testing and tuning of these systems to make sure that you're getting the optimum performance from them. We see things as crazy as particular programs not being switched on and they wonder why there isn't a match, or everything being matched but the parameters are so loose that there are just massive volumes of false positives to such an extent that the firm just can't cope with the output. And as again Fed alluded to, they end up switching them off and making the problem even bigger.
Thanks a lot. So it's really interesting because I guess that rings a bell to a lot of fintech. It's not about the top-notch system in terms of AML monitoring or in terms of onboarding. It's about tailoring it to what your risks are and what you're actually doing, and constantly in an ongoing way reviewing the way it works so that it's tailor-made and make sure that it works, which is constant work and which is not obvious for some of the financial institutions. Thanks, Joseph. Do you want to add up anything to these points?
I think they explained it pretty well, to be honest. I mean, maybe I'll add, I think that as it pertains again to kind of our ecosystem, we have a different set of challenges, but I also think the tools that are in place today and are being built are fairly exceptional. You know, it's the question is really around how do you do proper transaction monitoring, and of course we do have new challenges around pseudo anonymity and understanding who counterparties are across transaction flows. But I would say that if you're looking at the digital asset space broadly, our transaction monitoring capabilities are definitely up there, if not in some cases more advanced. And so, although most people have not been enforcing up for the last few years, I would say that that'll start to change, and I think we should start to see these tools also both develop and advance in really, really interesting ways, and probably intersect with the existing infrastructure that's used by traditional financial institutions today. So keep it short.
Thanks a lot for that. So I'd like to bounce back actually on what you've just said on the increased capacity for financial for, well, anyway, more broadly speaking, any subject entity to leverage technology to meet their requirement, but even I would say beyond that, to manage their risk, which at the end of the day is as important, if not more important, than just meeting the requirement and ticking the box. There are a lot of discussion at the moment, which I personally love. I find that really passionating, about supervisory technology, sub-tech as we refer to it. So basically the use of technology directly by supervisor to enhance, make better their risk-based approach and their efficiency in supervising the market participants. Now we have a lot of regulatory in Europe, but also throughout the world, that have access to much more transactional data that they used to have, either because they have a direct view on the payment system of the market participants, like as in Lithuania with Controlling, for example, or because they receive much more data from the market participant. And although in the past that was something we could not conceive because the volume of data, the volume of transaction was simply too gigantic to even consider acting on it, now this is something that technology enables us and the regulator to do. So what I wanted to ask you is first, and I mean, to be more specific, if we speak about transaction, do you think regulator and supervisor in Europe, but around the world, are ready for that, ready to use the technology for directly supervising the market participant? I guess we can start with you, Joseph, this time, and to change a bit the turn of the table.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's already happening today in most cases, at least. Chain analysis and other tools like that have been widely used by law enforcement around the world. Financial intelligence units are, if not integrated already, fairly well close to integrating. I mean, I think some countries have a bit of catch up in trying to figure out how exactly to use these tools, but I would largely say that they're in place and being used today. I think anything outside of on-chain transaction monitoring is not quite there in its development yet. I think it'll be, a little while longer as we see the market mature before we understand what other tools are really needed. And that really depends on, what aspects of the industry you're looking at. But I think for the most part, we've been focusing on, on-chain analytics, public blockchain networks. And from that perspective, I think they're fairly well advanced and that most people are using them. And we've already seen cases of, people being caught by the FBI and different, departments and agencies around the world for actually money laundering and terrorist financing. So I think it's happening, and I think it's the right approach, and I think that we'll see more of that in the mid to short term. So
hopefully, I hope so too. Steve, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, financial institutions around the world are already providing a vast amount of data to regulators, and they're using automated systems to actually capture the information. So it makes perfect sense for this to be the next step. Certainly from my experience, regulators are certainly getting there. Quite rightly, as was just said, there's still some work to do, but we are seeing them getting there. We've certainly been involved, for example, in thematic review work, where we've worked on behalf of regulators to actually look at systems that institutions have in place, provide that information to regulators. So it's certainly something that they're far more focused on, and we're just going to see more and more of it, and quite rightly too.
Thanks a lot. Federica, do you want to add an input?
Yes, I mean, I completely agree with everything that's been said. Regulators are certainly moving in that direction. Not all regulators are there. Certainly in the blockchain space, this is much more in existence than it is in the fiat world. But I think it is imperative for regulators that they get there also in the fiat space. And I am working with a particular European regulator to create this environment of essentially cross-market surveillance, so to speak, from an economic crimes point of view. The reason why it is important, it's because a transaction on its own may not be suspicious, and that is what we need to know from a financial crime point of view. But that transaction, if we start seeing it in the context of what is happening with other transactions, the same individual or associated individuals in other parts of the financial services sector, then all of a sudden the penny drops and it makes sense and the transaction becomes suspicious. And that ability, it's only with the regulators. A bank or a financial institution will always see a limited picture. Regulators are sitting on a gold mine of information, and it is important. It's absolutely vital that they use it and they make something with it.
Definitely, yeah. With this consolidation, we're definitely blind, yeah. So we've talked about the willingness and the fact that some regulator and supervisor around the world are already doing that. We already have success story. We are especially in the crypto area. Now, when it comes to market participants, when it comes to obliged entities, do you think they're ready to basically open their books and be absolutely transparent to the regulators? We can start with you, maybe, Joseph.
I mean, in our ecosystem, it's a bit of even more, I'd say a larger challenge. It's the question of what jurisdiction do you even hold? And so I think that that's largely what we're dealing with today is, with the exception of a very few, you have some of the largest, players and ecosystem participants in our ecosystem where we're struggling to understand where your jurisdiction is, let alone then being able to say jurisdictions asking, of course, for enhanced due diligence and everything else. But I largely think that the Western participants and actors, I think that that's a position that they're already doing. I think the majority of the largest Bitcoin exchanges, at least in kind of North America and largely in Western Europe, have been, very helpful to regulators and trying to work together to find solutions to problems, to help them understand and learn better across the ecosystem. And of course, that would come with being able to open their books and, across enhanced due diligence as well. So probably more relevant to the traditional space, I would say.
Thanks. Steve, what do you think on this one?
I would agree completely with what Joseph said. I think the only issue really is data protection legislation, which sometimes can prevent sharing of information. Even when I worked for a global group, we had problems with sharing information in certain jurisdictions that the data couldn't actually leave that particular jurisdiction, and it obviously created a problem. And if that's a problem just within one financial group, then it's certainly going to be a problem if we're looking across, the entire industry.
Thanks a lot. Federica, do you want to conclude on this topic?
Yes, I guess my perspective on this is that when firms perhaps cannot physically open their books and say to the regulator, just look at what I do as I do it, because I understand why that might pose an operational quite before a legal challenge. But the transparency and the openness of engaging with regulators can fill some of the gaps. And I must say that I have worked with different jurisdictions, and seen how that different approach really makes a difference to how successful a jurisdiction is in fighting financial crime. The jurisdictions where firms strongly collaborate with regulators are definitely more successful.
Thanks. We only have 2 minutes left. That was a lot to discuss. We probably have a lot more to say. So what I will propose you is that we wrap it up. And well, to get back on the initial question and the title of our panel, AML and KYC, the new king. When I heard the topic, I smiled, to be honest, thinking, it's interesting. We're going to speak at the FinTech Week, and to me, AML and FinTech, they just cannot be taken separately, for the simple reason that, to me, the AML is just the essence of what differentiates the traditional banking, the traditional financial services from what we call FinTech. If you take the onboarding, if you take the KYC, the ID verification, to me, that's exactly what makes it different. The fact that FinTech does it remotely, does it online, does it faster, does it while leveraging technology, is what makes FinTech in comparison to traditional banking, where you add and you still have some time to go physically to a branch to open an account, to refresh your KYC. Months ago, my French bank asked me to send them a copy of my KYC by post office. I'm not joking. So to me, that's AML is the and the way it's done, the way it evolves is just the essence of what is FinTech nowadays. So yeah, AML KYC, the new king, definitely in FinTech, but I would not say the new one. I would say it has always been a big part of it. Joseph, do you want to wrap it up?
Yeah, on the King side, I guess. Yeah, I mean, I think that the compliance and regulations is really important. Of course, I think from our ecosystem's perspective, it's about mass adoption, and I think that's what everyone's been trying to understand for the last few years. And so, whatever it is that gets digital assets, into a much more safe environment that allows us to better, build new products and services, leverage the existing systems as well, and make them more secure and more, streamlined. I think across the board is really, the intent of technology. And so, however we can kind of do that and enable that to happen in a much faster way globally is, I think, really important. And that's really, I think, what the mission and mandate of a lot of our ecosystem is. And so, I think on the other side of that too is it's also about how we use new types of infrastructure and new types of technologies to build things that we've never been able to build before. We've been working on solutions to the Financial Action Task Force travel rule, which, if you were to look at the solutions today, they look nothing like how SWIFT operates today. These are fully decentralized systems, being able to autonomously determine who your counterparties are and sharing data. A system like that is just impossible in a traditional context. And so I really think that we can also bring a lot of experience and innovation and new thinking into how technology is built in the compliance space and really make these systems lightweight, really easy to use, and hopefully better than the ones that we've had before. So.
Right. Thanks a lot. Steve, do you want to conclude on your side?
Yeah, my conclusion would just be for firms really to ensure that the systems and the controls that they have in place suit the risks and are fit for purpose. And when we're talking about automated systems and RegTech, that they are configured properly, that you have ongoing testing in place so that they are accurate, that they are doing the job you expect them to do without unnecessarily causing lots and lots of noise and false positives that just creates more work. So, I mean, really just in summary, we conducted a thematic review on behalf of the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, and the conclusion that their Director of Enforcement announced when they had their feedback conference was that most systems are working well, but they generate far too much noise. And if time can be spent on reducing that noise, you've got more time to be working on the real financial crime issues.
Right. Indeed, yeah. I think we're going in the right direction as well, but it's going to take some time, definitely. Federica, do you want to add something to wrap it up as well?
Yes, I completely concur with Steve. KYC can be a good king or a bad king. KYC could be us spending a lot of money and time and resources on a lot of convoluted, complicated process and just wasting money, ticking a box, patting ourselves on the back, saying, yes, you're doing the right thing, but actually leaving the financial crime environment unchanged. Or we could do things in a smarter way, perhaps spend less money, less resources, fewer resources, and obtain better results. And fintechs in particular have a huge opportunity because they are starting from a zero start compared to the bigger banks that are starting from the legacy. They have the technology available, so there's a huge opportunity for fintechs that I genuinely hope they take and they move forward with that.
Right, thanks a lot. So yeah, AML, KYC, more of an enabler than a roadblock. If well designed, it's smartly thought. That's definitely the way forward. And I'm very excited about what's coming. So thanks a lot, everybody, for taking the time to be with us today. I really hope we could meet in person next year in Vilnius. On that note, I would like to wish you a great day. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.